Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to today's workshop. My name is John Sack, and today we're going to do a workshop on comic book making. And it's going to be a workshop about the things that I've learned over the years of doing this that I have found really useful and helpful. And um, this is going to be sort of aimed, we've only got an hour, so we don't have too much time, and I won't be able to get into loads of detail about the types of things that I do. But I hope to give you like a pretty good overview about how I have approached like graphic journalism, which is making comics about situations in real life happening on the ground in different places. And I'll share with you some things that you could consider when if you are interested in doing this type of work. But even if you aren't, even if you are interested maybe in making comics about fictional stories or uh, things from your own life, like autobiographical things, I hope that there will be enough useful things in here for you to do those types of comics. So just to give you an idea of what we're going to talk about today, because like I said, we only have an hour. Um, I'm going to start by introducing myself to you because you probably don't know who I am and like maybe haven't come across the type of work that I do. So I'm going to spend the first little bit going over some projects that I've done in the past and also talk about like why on earth I got into comic books and making comics in the first place, because it wasn't anything I'd like ever planned to do. And when I first started doing comics, I had no idea what I was doing at all. So a lot of the things that I've learned over the years have been really coming through just pure trial and error. And I've made a lot of mistakes. And so I'm hoping that some of the things that I'll share with you today, maybe can be useful for you in terms of like finding what works for you. And this isn't like um, a guide to tell you like the definitive way to make comics and graphic novels. This is just simply what works for me. And honestly, you can do it any which way you want. So I'm going to talk a little bit first about how I got into making comics and why. And I'll go over some of the projects that I've done in the past. And that I think is important because I'm going to be referencing a couple of those projects and show you how I work to create a page. So like what that creative process is like, how to go to a particular place and collect data, like um, doing interviews or taking videos and photos and the types of things you want to consider when you're out in the field doing that type of work. Um, and maybe this isn't something that interests you at the moment, but maybe in the future it could. And so, like I said, I only have an hour, so I won't be able to show you how to draw on this workshop, because that is beyond the scope of what I, what I can achieve in an hour. But there are like tons and tons of YouTube videos on drawing lessons, and there are certain basics that you should probably be familiar with. Um, and I'm going to show you a couple of videos of like just like what my drawing process is like. Um, but I'm also going to like give you some resources of things to think about and show you books that I have found really useful that can do far more than I can in an hour in terms of helping you to create a comic or a graphic novel or whatever you want to do. So I've never done like a workshop on Zoom, like pre-recorded. This is like kind of weird and new for me. So bear with. I'll try to make it as interesting and exciting as possible. And hopefully you can come away from this with some things to think about, and maybe some things that you'll find useful for whatever it is that you might want to do. So I've got like a presentation with lots of images and videos that I'm going to share with you, and we'll start talking through it. So, to begin with, hi, my name is John Sack, and I've been doing comics for a while. This is just an example of a lot of different pages from a lot of different projects that I've done over the years. And you can see I do a lot of stuff. Most of my stuff is in black and white, which is mainly just brush and ink. and pen. Um, I'm doing quite a lot of stuff in color now, but that is a bit of a different process. And I never thought I would be making comics. I came to the UK to go to art school, and I was really much, pretty interested in pursuing some sort of career as an artist who, shows artwork in a gallery and things like that. And what happened was while I was towards the end of doing my master's in fine arts, I read some comics, and I was like, it really started to make me think about different and unique ways that you can tell stories and give a lot of information as well to an audience of readers that could be really engaging and a lot of fun to read and really immersive. So what happened was I came across, this is my first example. Let's see, there we go. So this is a comic that I came across. I'll just hold that up to the camera. It's by a woman named Kate Evans, um, and I read this like a long time ago. And this is just like, there's only about 15 pages in this. Um, but it really is an interesting way to talk about climate change. And here's like just a couple of, oh, this is just like one page from it. But you can see the drawing style is like it's quite like basic, but it's really good. She's really good at telling stories. And it's a very sort of like engaging and humorous way of telling a story about climate change and also conveying a lot of information. And it started to make me think, maybe this is like an interesting, way that to tell a story about, something that's political and that affects our lives in a way that I wasn't able to do just by, you know, making a painting or doing some sort of installation. Around the same time, I read this book as well. This is a book called Palestine. This is it. This is a copy I read like all those years ago. It's quite a thick book. Um, it's written and drawn by an artist and writer and journalist named Joe Sacco. And maybe you've come across this book. Maybe you've never heard of it. But this book, probably more than anything else, really began to change my mind about what I wanted to do. And uh, because when I read this story, it was really unique. It wasn't like going to the cinema. It wasn't like going to see a documentary film. It wasn't like watching something on telly. It wasn't like reading a newspaper article or something in a magazine. It was really different, and it was really engaging, and it was really immersive. Like I was lost in this book. The drawings, I'll have here's a couple of examples, are really, you can see just how much detail there is in these drawings, and you can get really just lost in these pages. And so the way he tells his stories and does his journalism is he puts himself and inserts himself and his own experience into these pages to show how he's interacting with people, the places he's going. He includes, like you can see here, he'll include things like maps to show some bits of history, and he's done a lot of other books beyond this. He's really he's a very, very talented individual who I think was really one of the, you know I don't know how to put this, like originators of comics as a form of journalism. And it really had an impact on me when I read Palestine. Um, it really broadened my mind as to what the possibilities could be with um, telling a story about other people's lived experiences in a way that was engaging and compelling and honest. Um, and around that time, I started to do, well, I volunteered myself to do my first comic called Iraqi Oil for Beginners. And that's this little comic right here. And as you can see, it's towards the end. It's got a lot of words, but it's only 30 pages long. And I did this around 2006 or so. And the reason I did this was because I was doing a lot of art, but I was also doing a lot of activism. And a lot of it was around the Iraq War and what was happening to Iraq's oil fields. And I remember I attended a workshop, and there was a guy, a researcher, friend of mine, who was giving a presentation on the history of British involvement in the Middle East, in particular about Middle East oil, going back to the beginning of the 20th century. And I remember thinking at the time that I had never heard these stories before. It was like really new to me, and I was a bit embarrassed. I'd never heard these stories before. And I can't remember if it was myself or it was somebody else who thought of making a comic about this history, but I volunteered to do it. And I mean, I had no idea what I was doing. I had never done a comic before. Um, like I said, I've only read like, Palestine and Kate Evans' comic prior to starting this. And so it was really new to me. I had, like I said, no idea what I was doing, didn't have a particular type of drawing style. Here's a couple of pages from that. And you can see there is a bit of maybe similarity between, Joe Sacco's work and my own. I drew these on A4 pieces of paper, which I don't do anymore. I'll show you like the tools that I use to make comics and nowadays. But back then, I just drew these on A4 pieces of like printer, just normal A4 pieces of paper with a pen. Um, and I didn't have a particular place I was doing it. I did a lot of this just sat in bed. I did a lot of research to begin with. So you can see in the back of this, there's a list of articles, and you can't really see it, but there's a list of articles and books that I read to do research about this history. And then I wrote a story using this all this research. And then I began to think about how I could tell this in visually or with like drawings and combination of drawings and words. So I learned a lot from this process. It was very messy. There's a lot of words. I think towards the as the comic progresses, there's more words and there's less pictures. So but it was a learning experience, and we were able to use this as a way to raise money by selling it for, I don't know, think about like £3 or £5, and it was used to help various activist groups who were campaigning against privatizing of Iraq's oil during that period of time. The next book that I'm skipping over a lot of projects that I've done. There just isn't the time, and I don't really want to make this about everything that I've ever done. I think these are just I'm just showing you like some projects that I've done that I'm going to talk about in a little bit more depth very soon to show you how I did these projects. So it's first probably smart to introduce some of these projects to you. So the next one was called La Lucha, and this one was a project that I did with a human rights organization based in Dublin called Frontline Defenders. And this was a really unique opportunity and it was a huge opportunity and step up for me to engage in a similar type of graphic journalism where the guy who commissioned this work was Adam Shapiro, who works for Frontline Defenders. And I remember at the time he told me that the reason he wanted to use comics to tell these stories was because he considered people who are human rights defenders and who are, defending the environment as superheroes. These are people who are doing really hard work in really difficult circumstances across the world. And he felt like comics was just really the perfect and most sensible medium to tell these stories of of people who are doing really hard and important work. It was also an idea as well that these these stories and these books would be published not only in English but also in the countries where the stories took place. So this book was used was not only published here in the UK and in the US, but also published in Mexico and was introduced into this, I think, the secondary school system in the state of Chihuahua in their emerging curriculum on human rights. So the idea was like it would go just beyond an audience of English speaking people, but might have an impact in Mexico as well. So I'll just show you some pages from this book and you can get a sense of how, I don't know, my drawing style, I guess, evolved a bit. These stories were, these were difficult stories of people who had lost loved ones to violence because of, in a nutshell, like drug cartels um, and also a lot of corruption as well. So these were, if you are interested in doing this type of work, and I'll maybe speak about this a little bit later. Um, it's worth considering that you have a responsibility when you are telling somebody else's story, especially when you're drawing those stories. Um, in this case, I was having to retell the stories of basically violence and murder in a way where I knew that the family members who had survived were going to read these stories. So there was a lot of nuance and ethical considerations to for me to consider when telling these stories. So we went to Mexico. We interviewed a lot of people, and again, I'll talk a little bit more about this later. Took a lot of photographs, took a lot of video. One thing I would really recommend doing if you're going to do this work is take a lot more photos than you think you'll need, um, and video, because inevitably this has happened every single time I've done a project like this. Um, I always come back and I always wish I'd taken more photos. There's always something I missed, or a particular place or person from a different angle that I didn't get. So try to just bear that in mind. It might seem like you've taken a lot of photos and video, but it's worth just taking more than you think you'll need, because it'll come in handy later on. So this is just a couple of examples again from La Lucha of, we interviewed a lot of people. The book really centers around a woman named Lucha Castro, but we told other people's stories as well. And you can see here on the left hand side, this is how I depicted someone being um, shot by somebody, and this is another person telling another story. This is another couple of pages from somebody else's story. Um, and these are some images uh, of his story. So I want to spend a little bit of time, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in depth later, talking about mining. So Judy from Eden Place Art Center has uh, let me know about the Spirin. I'm probably pronouncing this wrong. The Spirin Mountains, and the attempts of I think a Canadian mining corporation to want to start a gold mine there, and there being some opposition to that. And so I thought it'd be interesting to tell you about a project I did, again with Frontline Defenders. This hasn't been published yet, and I hope it will be someday. Um, and this was a project where we went to several countries and we visited people who were resisting these huge open pit mines. You can see this is the Kumtor mine in Kyrgyzstan. I think it's the largest open pit gold mine. I'm not sure if it's gold or copper. Um, no, I guess no, I've written here it's gold. So it's huge. It's one of the largest in Central Asia, and we weren't actually able to get this close to it. This image right here is just taken from photos I found on the internet, and this is a very politically sensitive area. We weren't allowed to get that close to it, and the story we did for this tells you why that is. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we made these stories about um, these areas where there are large scale mining operations. And I'll tell you some of the things that we did and I guess, the process of how we went to these places, took a lot of photos and videos and interviews, and how I came back home and sifted through all those and started to be able to create a story based on all those interviews and all those photos that we took. Um, Here's a couple of more pages from when we were in Mongolia. Um, so you can see, yeah, there's a lot of text, and these are based on photos. That's me right there, looking at binoculars, and that's what I'm seeing right there. Um, in these stories, we did a lot of traveling in these countries, and I was able to use those travels as a sort of narrative arc as a way to tell the story. It was a very handy thing to use. So we would go from place to place interviewing people. We'd interview someone in one place and we'd drive in Mongolia. We were driving what seemed like the middle of nowhere. You can kind of get a sense of that in these panels here. We were, driving through a snowstorm in the basically what felt like just driving through endless fields. Um, but we were able to use these like travels as a way to tell, as a structure to tell these stories. And again, this is some examples of the story we did in Peru with this is a woman named Maxima Acuna, who we visited and spent time with, and I'll talk a little bit more about her later. And this is her. Um, this is just an example of how I depicted her telling a story, where I set, she was sat in front of us, telling a story, and sometimes I would draw someone being interviewed, um, just sat where they are and just show only them. Other times, like this, where I would start with some drawings of them telling a story, and then I would start to draw that story that they're telling. It's not always possible to do this. Sometimes the way people tell stories is um, can be very meandering and really hard to pin down how you could tell that through pictures. Other times it's really easy if they're a good storyteller and they tell things in really vivid detail and it's something that happened that was very concrete. Sometimes it can be hard to depict someone's internal feelings and what they're feeling inside. But in this case, it was something that occurred, and and then I brought the story back to her here, sitting in front of us, and then this was the end of the interview, and this is us leaving in this car. And this is another example of someone who we interviewed in Peru, and he's telling his story. And although he's here appearing in every panel with a lot of text, I wanted to really emphasize his emotional. Uh, he got very upset and quite emotional towards the end of this interview, and I really wanted to try to convey that through how I drew him in the final panel, because he was really angry, and so I tried to convey that with this panel here. And these are just a couple of examples of work that I did for a magazine where I went to the border of Turkey and Syria about 6 years ago or so. And this was in color, and these are just young men who had been injured in Syria, and they were being taken care of in these private homes in this border town in Turkey. Um, and this is an example of a this is a publication that was produced by an organization called On the Record, and what they did was really interesting. So I guess there's two things I really want to for you to take home from this presentation. One is like that your voice matters. You might not think that people are interested in what young people have to say, but I don't think that's true. And I think like there are ways of working either on your own or collaboratively with other people that can produce things that are really compelling. And this is a project that was by young people, by teenagers in London, and they were talking about these sus laws that were in effect in the UK that were really horrible laws, really racist laws. And they went and interviewed all these activists who are older now, they're probably in their 60s and 70s. but they were telling their like stories of their involvement and how they helped to overturn these really horrible laws. And so they interviewed these people, and then I got the transcripts, which means sort of all these interviews, but like how they were when they were written down. And then I was able to piece together little bits and bobs and create a story with them, and then I illustrated those stories. So this book, um, it's a really cool little booklet, and you can see it's got photos, it's got poetry, it has some work that I did, and so the organization, got funding and helped facilitate all of this. But it was really organized and really um, put together by young people, and it was a really nice way to be a part of something that they were had already done a lot of work on. This is another story that I did for that same little booklet. Um, and this is again, this is just to show you how illustrations can be used to show a lot of things that might be difficult to do just with words or through video. Um, so this was a little project for an organization showing some borders and showing dynamics of like migration dynamics in these different border areas. And here's one with Ireland and Northern Ireland. Let's see. And finally, this is just to show you the last thing I worked on was this book of fiction. So I've been doing a lot of fiction work lately, which is its own unique kind of set of skills, which I won't go in here into like I won't go into a lot of detail here. But some of the same methods I use to draw a page and to work creatively apply equally to the sort of more journalistic things. And you can see that this is like just a couple of pages from that book. And I think this is the actor who stars in it, Ryan Guzman. And I think this film is going to be possibly shown as part of this Human Rights Festival as well. So, yeah, these are just a couple of pages from that book. Um, I want to talk a little bit now about how I went from going to these places and speaking to people, taking lots of photos and video, and then I'd come back home and then I would sit down at my desk and start to figure out how to make stories about what we had just experienced and who we had met and the stories that we heard. So, like I said before, one tip: take more photos and videos of than you think you'll need because the more the better. But also, um, it's really worth considering other people's levels of comfort when you take photos and videos because some people might not want their photos taken, even if they're in the background. It's always worth, especially if they're doing a form of activism, um, you really need to consider people's feelings about whether they actually want their photos and video taken of them because I think we're just so used to like cameras everywhere, phones everywhere, um, that we can often maybe it might not occur to us to ask permission. But I think in these circumstances, you need to just be aware of how you're coming into a situation as an outsider where you're going to be telling other people's stories and just being aware of it's just I guess it's just being polite and considerate about asking permission and just making sure people are aware that you're taking photos of a particular group of people or a particular environment because maybe there's something about that environment that people might not want you to take photos of or some people just might not want to be have their picture taken even if they're standing in the background, so you really need to take that into consideration to begin with. Another thing to do when you're visiting um, a particular site is just take lots of notes. What I would do is just have a little notebook with me, and I would just like write down lots of little notes. And at the end of the day, I would just write one page of everything I had experienced that day. Um, it sounds a bit of a faff, but honestly, like you will thank yourself in the end for doing this you will, because when you get back home, there are details that you will definitely forget, of the things that you experience on that specific day. And often those little details that you write down at the end of the day can be really interesting to include in whatever you're trying to draw, um, as part of your comic. So in this example, you can see like this was the beginning of a story about this guy. His name is Saul and his family. And in this case, the interview took place in this law office here. And one thing I had realized when I got back home is I actually didn't have a photo of what the law office looked like. So what's useful to consider are two things here. A, sometimes when you start a page of comics in a new setting, if you're telling a story, sometimes it's a good idea just to have a drawing of where that is taking place, so people have an idea of, well, like where this is happening. Um, in this case, this interview is happening in this law office here, and I got home and realized, that I didn't have a photo of it. So I'm not a huge fan of Google, but I do use Google Street View and Google Earth to, help find places where I might not have been able or have had time to go visit. And in this case, I was able pretty easily to find, using Google like Street View, to find the outside of this law office and just draw a little depiction of it here. And this is a screenshot of, um, the interview that we did with Saul, and that obviously helped form, this drawing here and other drawings to start his story. Um, so one thing that you should consider, and I do not have the time to go into this in great detail, but, another thing to consider when you're doing this type of work is you really want to make sure that the photos and videos that you're taking are going to be secure and safe, because sometimes you're taking photos and videos of people and their stories, and, um, it's best that those things, that are either on your phone or on your computer or on a camera, stay with you and don't fall into the wrong hands. So there are lots of guidelines on how to be safe and secure, when you're doing this type of work. And these are just a couple of guidelines, for, how to keep your data secure. It's always a good idea to, um, know how to navigate the internet safely anyway, because we're spending so much time online nowadays with a pandemic. But if you were to just put in your search, browser or your search engine, if you wanted just to look up Frontline Defenders digital security, this, page has a lot of different resources for things you can read about, yeah, how to, you want to come up with a plan before you would to go and interview someone, especially if it was in a place that might be a bit dodgy, might be a bit, not dodgy, but like, um, where there could be concern for if you were to lose or someone were to confiscate the things that you had, like the photos you had taken or the video you had taken. So you want to come up with a plan before you do this work. And looking at these resources is a really good way to start, that planning process. So the EFF is the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and they have some really good guides as well in terms of how to think about keeping your data safe. And I wish I could talk more about this. I just don't really have time, but like, I would definitely recommend doing a bit of research, about how to keep your stuff safe and secure. So going back to how I would start to think about how to put a page together. Um, Now, obviously, when you do an interview with someone, there is a really boring aspect to that where when you get back home, you need to, it really helps to transcribe their interview so you have it written out in front of you, like I mentioned before, because you're going to want to start to look at that and read through it to figure out what parts of their interview you might want to turn into a story that you could draw. And like I said before, some people are really good at telling stories. Some can be quite meandering and might be quite difficult to draw. So in this case, a lot of the interviews were in Spanish, so we had to get them translated first. And aside from that, um, I was doing a lot of my own research as well, looking at other articles about some of these stories. And you can see here, I found some images of this man's family here in this magazine cover that I put in at the top corner here. And this is an image of him protesting in front of what looks like a government building. And I just drew him doing that, but from a different angle. And I included a photo. These were all photos, by the way, I think from an article about about this guy's family. And so I was able to include this little image here, right over here, and that's an image of his sister, and that's who the story's about. Now, looking at the stories we did about mining, you can see here, these are just some examples of some of the photos and video that we took while we were there. And we were traveling like really long distances. So we just kept taking, interviewing people and locals. And when I got back home, I was able to use like some of the screen, like stills from these interviews as ways to tell this guy's story. And when I do these things, I want to keep it interesting. Obviously, I want to keep it interesting for the reader because I want them to find it engaging and compelling and interesting and exciting to read. But I also want to keep it interesting for myself as well because sometimes, these things can take a while to do, and I want to make each page, kind of visually engaging for myself and for readers as well. So in this case, you can see he's telling a story about these mountains back here where a mining corporation is really interested in starting a mining operation there, and it's a very sensitive, culturally very sensitive area. So he's telling a story about these mountains, and here I was able to, include what he looks like and his face, and we finished this little interview because we just pulled over on the side of the road and then we continued on. And you can see here we're following the sky. This is a view from inside the van we were in. So again, I was taking lots of photo and video that was really useful when I got home to use for this particular story. And you can see here this mountain. We passed this mountain right here that looks a bit like a lion. Um, so all of these different elements, I was able to use in one page to make it what hopefully might be a interesting page to look at and read. One thing, another thing I had to use in this story about mining in Mongolia is we were traveling like really across like really vast areas, and it was really hard to get a sense of where we were. And we did an interview on top of a mountain, or well, a big hill. It wasn't really a mountain, but it was like a big hill. And on this big hill, we were able to look into a valley and see lots of like mining operations going on. And it was a bit tricky to actually get an idea of like where we were. So when I got back home, I went on Google Earth and spent about, an hour or two trying to piece together some visual clues of where we were and try to find where we were on Google Earth because I really wanted to get a sense from above of what we were looking at. So you can see here, I was able to figure out where we were, what hill we were standing on, and what our view was. So we were standing where this little yellow pin is, and this was the area we were looking at. And I was able to rotate this view a little bit and include an image of this in another page in this book about Mongolia. So this is like the valley here, part of the valley where there were different mining companies doing different things. And then I was able to use Google Earth to find an image from above so that the viewer and the reader could get a sense what it looked like from above. So that's another resource you could think about if you were, doing a story about for instance, like mining, and you wanted to get an aerial view of what it looks like. And this is like kind of before drones were a big thing. So we didn't really have that access to, put a drone in the air and get some visual pictures as well from above. So anyway, it's one more thing to like think about that could be useful. Um, Here are just some other examples of this is us in Peru, and this is Maxima and her interview. So you can see how like this photo right here was used to set the scene for this panel, because we had to come through this little door, and Maxima did her interview sitting in this chair. So anyway, this is just an example of how different uh, like photos that you take can be used to compose kind of like a collage um, on your drawn page when you make a comic. So another example of um, where we're doing an interview with somebody, and sometimes it's just more compelling just to show them like talking. In this case, this is the family home. This is Daniel. He's the son of Maxima. And we were doing this interview here, and it was really cold and it was really wet. And I just thought it was kind of interesting just to show him talking just sat in this environment. So you've got, there's a stove here, he's got something cooking. You can see the rain in the background. And I really wanted to give a sense of where this interview was taking place. Again, this is just how I've worked in the past. You can do this work however you want. It doesn't have to be this detail orientated. This is just, some things that, like I've said, I've considered when doing work like this. Um, and here's another example of what you can do with drawing. So this is their house. So this house right here, that's what it looks like from above, like from far away. And you can see over here, there's a fence. And this fence has been put up by the mining corporation because they want to kick this family off their land, even though they own this land. And they want to drive them out, and they're resisting. So they put up a CCTV camera here to monitor them at all times. And it's a real disgusting form of intimidation by this corporation, but I wanted to show you the reader, just what the land looked like before this fence was put up. And there's another fence here. You can see this fence here. So they've put up two fences to try to squeeze them. So I did my own research. This is my own photograph, and then I did some research and was able to find what this area of land looked like before the mining company came and put up these two fences. So just to show the reader that there have been negative impacts on their area of land from this, and drawing is a really useful way to be able to literally illustrate that. So sometimes it involves doing your own research, finding your own images, like when you get back home. In this case, I can't remember off the top of my head where I found some images of what this place looked like before the mining company came. But anyway, I thought it would be interesting for the reader to look at. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about how I actually like the creative process, about how I go about drawing a page. And this applies pretty much equally for when I'm doing fiction as to when I'm doing nonfiction and like more sort of journalistic uh, type of projects. So you can see here, this is the setup. It's really pretty basic. You don't need, I mean, the nice thing about comics is you don't need a lot of money or a lot of space to be able to make a comic. And like I said, when I did this, a Rocky Oil for Beginners, like I did most of this just sitting in bed, or like I said, at work. I used to work for books, a bookstore, and I would just stand at the counter when it was really slow and just draw pages. So I didn't really need a lot of space to do this. And now I've got a desk, and I have this drawing board, which is, pretty battered by now, but it's really helpful to have this straight edge which travels up and down the drawing board. So it's just helpful to draw parallel lines when you're drawing I don't know, in this case, drawing panels on the page. Um, but it's a good idea to have maybe some sort of overhead lamp that's attached to the desk, so you have really good light. Um, and so the process for me, um, once I've got something written, um, like a story that I've been able to tell by going through the transcripts of like interviews and also including my own thoughts and feelings about some of these places that I've been, and I've written a story, I'll start to think about how I'm going to tell that visually through drawings. And the first place for me is to just start with a really rough sketch. So you can see here, this was when I was doing some pages for Windows on the World. Um, it would start with like just a rough sketch in a sketchbook of like the main like bits of action that I wanted to see happen. You don't have to do this, but for me, and I don't always do this, but most of the time I do, I just want to get a sense of how much I can put into a page um, without it getting too messy or too crammed. And then I know what's going to happen on the next page. So in this case, I'm able to, yeah, block in. It doesn't have to be this detailed either. Um, it can be like really just stick figures. Um, like, and most of like, even now, like when I sketch out like a page, it's not even this detailed. It's just like stick figures, just sort of blobs, just sort of like to get a basic idea of what's going to happen on the page. And again, I don't always do it, but most of the time I do. I think it's like can be quite helpful. And then I use, so I don't draw in A4 anymore. I've been using this, it's like about A3 size watercolor paper. It's a bit expensive, but it's really thick. And because I use a lot of um, like brush and pen, or sorry, brush and ink, the paper is really well suited to absorb ink. So whereas if you use just like normal A4 paper, it would kind of warp the page a bit. And one thing I've learned as well is drawing on a much bigger sheet of paper is when you go to scan it, um, and when it gets printed, it'll be, you know, shrunk down into a much smaller image, and it'll look a lot nicer, a lot more precise, and a lot cleaner. Again, you don't have to do this. It's just, I think, a thing that a lot of comic book artists do, and it's one of those things that I learned really through trial and error. And now it's just something that I do all the time. Another thing to consider as well is once you have something drawn on a piece of paper, you're going to get it, you're going to need to scan it somehow. So, you know, one thing to consider is like most printers that you have in your home are only able to scan something that's about A4, whereas you're drawing on A3. It's a bit more difficult to find somewhere to be able to scan that image. So if there's like a photocopier at school, you can get it scanned there, or some offices, you know, will have like a photocopying machine and you can just like put your image down and scan it. You can buy A3 scanners, but just to give you a heads up, it can be a bit more, it can be a little bit more difficult to find somewhere to scan your drawing if you're drawing that big. And once you do scan it in, what I use is Photoshop to open that drawing that you've just scanned. And I'll use Photoshop just to clean up the images a little bit and get it ready to, you know, send to a publisher, because and publishers will want their, excuse me, their drawings formatted in a particular way. But we don't have to go into that right now. That's just to give you a heads up about what happens after you draw an image or draw a page. So let's move on. So you've got this sort of sketch, and then I draw it bigger on the bigger piece of paper. And I'm going to go through that process with you right now for a page that I recently did. So you can see here, this is just an A4 page that I drew. And then I get the bigger piece of paper and I'll start drawing it. And I've been using, um, So you see how I'm drawing in blue, this sort of blue pencil lead. I'm using this sort of mechanical pencil with blue. It's a special blue pencil lead. I've been using this stuff right here. And what this enables you to do is when you scan this in on a printer, those pencil lines won't show up. Whereas if you're drawing like a normal pencil, what will often happen is that if you sketch something in pencil and then you put ink over it, sometimes those pencil lines will come up in the scan, and then you have to go back in and sort of take them out. So what would often happen is before I started using this blue pencil lead, I would have to go ink everything in and then go with a rubber and just, rub all those like pencil marks out. And it just added more time. And sometimes you would end up erasing some of the ink as well. So it was kind of annoying. So this has been really useful. Like using this blue pencil it just takes part of the process out where you have to like go back in and rub things out. So I will still use like a normal pencil just to get a bit more um, detail on like some faces here, but you'll see like this is like the page pretty much sketched out, and now I'm ready to start using a pen to start inking it in. And so usually start with like just doing the text and text bubbles, and then I'll start using a brush. So a lot of comic book artists use these brushes. They're Winsor Newton Series 7 brushes. They're kind of expensive. This one is probably about 14 pounds. And it's a really good idea to try to, if you're using a brush like this, you can get really, really nice lines. It takes a bit of getting used to, but you always want to make sure that you use like a brush cleaner to clean them at the end of the day, because if you don't, and I do this quite often where I will forget to clean my brush at the end of the day, and then they don't tend to last as long, and then you have to buy more. So if you really want to make this go a long way, it's really, I would highly recommend getting some sort of like brush cleaner and just giving them a good clean at the end of the day and as you go along. So you can see like there are bits here where I've used a brush, and a lot of the line work is just done with a brush. Um, and then that's kind of like that page done in terms of like having been drawn. Um, so again, going back to this example, you'll see it started with this sketch, and then I drew it in pencil, and this is what the page, let's move myself over there. This is what the page looked like when I was done, and what it looked like when it appeared in the book. Um, So I'm going to show you just a couple of quick videos about how I drew some of these things. I mean, they're only like 30 seconds each, so it won't take long, but you'll see like, um, let's see, get this started. So you can see I'm just sketching this in this guy's face. And like I mentioned before, there's like a lot of videos on YouTube, and there's a lot of books, and there's a lot of resources you can tap to um, help you like drawing styles and drawing capabilities. But I'll get into this a little bit later, because I really want to emphasize this. Do not feel intimidated if you feel like your drawing ability isn't up to scratch. That is like, you can still make comics, and you can still publish a best-selling comic book. Even if you're got like a really basic drawing skill. Um, this is another tool that I use that I'll just start playing this. So I use a lot of the line work I use is with like a nib like this that's dipped in a bottle of ink, and it's really tricky to use at times. But um, how it's different than just using a pen is you can get a lot of variation in your line. You can get really thick lines, really thin lines, and what you're doing is actually you're kind of scratching the page, and the ink's going in there. So the ink will take longer to dry. And I do this all the time where I'll draw something with this and then kind of forget about it. And then I'll put my hand in it and smear the ink. It's really annoying, but it does happen. Um, Now, obviously, if you're using a pen like this, and sometimes I do use a pen as well, the ink dries very, very quickly. Um, and here's an example of me using a brush to draw some lines. So this is just, you take your brush, dip it in ink, and sometimes I like to have a like a paper towel next to me so that I've got something to clean up any mess or just like wipe a bit of excess ink off of when I'm using either this or this. You can see, like, if you were to see my desk, it's got loads of ink stains, and this is a heads up to parents as well. Like, if your child is interested in making comics, like, and you're drawing on like a nice table, I would recommend covering that table in newspaper if you're using ink, because um, I have spilled ink many, many times, and it's just an occupational hazard. Like, it might happen, and it's pretty annoying when it does, and you don't want to ruin nice furniture. So yeah, I'm going to try to get to the next slide. Let's see, there we go. So again, this is just me drawing with pencil. I won't play the full thing, but just to give you an idea of how I work, you don't have to draw everything in pencil. I'm just really slow, and I like to have everything sketched in pencil first, and then I put ink over it. You don't have to do this, but it gives you a really good sense of how everything is, where it's going to be on the page. Um, and then you can go in and draw over it in ink. And this is just me using a pen. Um, so for Windows on the World, I did a lot of like line work like this just to give things some depth because it was all in black and white. And so I used a lot of lines to do a lot of the work. So I'm going to recommend, because I don't really have the time to go into all aspects of how to make a comic, this book, Making Comics by Scott McCloud, this has been probably the best book I've come across in terms of how to make a comic. It really covers everything you could ever possibly want to know. Like, um, I mean, I can't even summarize like what's in it. It really does. It gives you drawing tips. It gives you. You can see here. These are. I still refer to this when I work. This is, he's got a whole section on how to draw the body, how to draw faces, how to draw body language is really important. How to draw, facial expressions. It's a really, really, really useful resource to have. I would highly recommend reading this book. It's been really, really helpful for me. And sorry, these images are a bit pixelated, but you can get a sense of what he's, I don't know, talking about, how to draw things in perspective, things to include, how different angles that you draw things at can have different emotional impact for like the reader. Um, so yeah, recommended book. Here's another one, Alan Moore, Writing for Comics. So this is um, this is more for like if you're writing fiction and writing, let's say you have your own idea for something you want to write about, that's a story you want to tell. This was written, I think, in like 1985, so quite a long time ago, but it's a very thin book. I've got a copy here. um, See, it's only got like um, about 40 pages, but he really goes into why comics are different than movies or novels, how it's unique, how it's really an interesting way to tell a story, things to consider when you're thinking about your story idea and the world that you're building for your story. It's really, really interesting. I would recommend trying to get a copy of this. Um, and just before I go, because we don't really have much time, just a few other bits and bobs, some tools that I use. Um, so I do a lot of erasing. Drawing's hard. I find it hard. I will often use, because you see, I think by now you've kind of gotten a sense of my style. I draw things in kind of a lot of detail, and sometimes when I want to draw like the human body, it can be kind of difficult doing that, especially if you want to see how like clothes hang or different sort of like body language. Like if someone's got really angry body language or someone's trying to express something, it can be kind of hard to draw that just through your own imagination. Sometimes what I use is like Photo Booth on an Apple computer, or I'm sure there's something equivalent in Windows. And this is just something that allows your computer to take a picture of you. So you can do that in a particular pose, and then you can use that, you can become your own model for how you draw the people in your comic. Just beware that if you're using yourself as a model for how you're drawing a lot of people, just be aware that you might start drawing everyone like yourself. And not everyone has your sort of same, has your body. But it's really useful as a tool to use in terms of a shortcut in terms of like how to draw people. But again, if you have a really, basic or different drawing style, it probably wouldn't really matter anyway. Um, I do a lot of erasing because I make a lot of mistakes. Use a lot of correction fluid because I make a lot of mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. Like you can make a million mistakes. It doesn't matter. Like it's a process, and you don't need to be too hard on yourself. Um, I use like a correction like pen like this to just rub out, things. It's useful, and I use like one of these. Um, this is just an eraser in a little sort of pen shape that you can, click. Uh, Again, really useful. And this is just like I think this is like a jelly roll pen. It's like white ink. It's really again useful to just tidy up your drawing if you wanted to. Um, and this is just an example. If your writing style or if your drawing style you feel like is really basic, just to let you know that that's fine. That's totally fine. Like so many cartoonists have, we all have different styles. I'm totally want to, keep evolving my style, and I might get more cartoony like this at some stage. But this is just an example of someone, Marjan Satrapi's Persepolis, which was like a massive bestseller, was made into a film. And you can see like her drawing style is like quite basic, but she's a beautiful storyteller. Her story, this was a best-selling book for that reason. It's a really um, uh, perfect sort of drawing style for her type of like storytelling. I was going to show you some images from history of different graphic artists whose art has actually had real world like implications, like things happened because of the art that they did. But I don't think I really have time to go through some of these cartoons. And these are obviously just, these are more sort of cartoons that are commenting on things that are happening in the world as opposed to making, narrative or story comics. Um, but I'm just going to share with you, just before I wrap up, just a couple more examples of different drawing styles to give you an idea of the range out there. Um, so Frontline Defenders, again, is this human rights organization based in Dublin, and they've just initiated this series called Cypher. And it's basically comics that are published every month, I think, online. And they're stories from around the world. So they hook up artists and writers to work on projects together. And you can see here, like the drawing styles like totally vary. So you have something like this, you can have something totally different like this, very beautiful. Um, and something like, really basic as well. So there's an incredible range of different styles that are out there. Uh, and you don't need to feel like, again, I'll say this, two things: your voice really matters. Like if you have stories that you might want to tell, even if it's just your perspective about coronavirus and how you've been dealing with lockdown, it doesn't have to be political. um, there's ways to tell these stories that don't depend, you don't have to have really flashy drawing skills. You just have to have a willingness to give it a try. And yeah, and just let your imagination go, and just it's a really fun creative form of storytelling. um, And this is just, I'm just going to end this with like just a 3-minute video. This is a project I did very recently with a human rights organization based in the UK called Each Other. And a couple years ago, there was a representative from the UN who traveled across Britain, detailing and interviewing people's stories about poverty, because he was doing a special report on extreme poverty in the UK. And this is just a video that was made. It's an animation that was made um, using audio. So he interviewed a bunch of young people, and the audio isn't like the greatest quality, but we were able to like create a story using these interviews that he did with young people, and the young people are telling stories from their lives. And so I did these illustrations, and then an animator came in and used these um, illustrations to make a little animated cartoon. Um, and so I'm gonna play this for you, and then I'll wrap up. Hey guys. I hope that was interesting. I just wanted to include that um, to show you just another example of how cartoons and animation can be used to illustrate people's stories. And I think that pretty much does it for today. I hope that there was some useful things perhaps that you can come away with from today's workshop. Maybe someday we can do a workshop in person after this pandemic's over. I can, come over and spend a day and we can produce something together. But thanks if you've made it this far. Thank you. I hope it wasn't too boring, and I hope some of what I talked about made sense, and that it can be useful for whatever you want to do in the future. Okay, guys. Thanks. Bye.